and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks Radio. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm so excited that you're joining us today. We are going to have a fascinating conversation as usual as we learn from people all around the world at all ages and stages of life. Stay tuned as we shift our dementia care from crisis to comfort.
Here we go. What you think about, you will bring about dementia change. We will.
Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to Alzheimer Speaks. I'm your host, Lori LeBay, and I'm thrilled you can join us today. We're going to have a very interesting conversation with a professional who's been in the business quite a while. We're going to be talking about aging doesn't have to be stressful, and some days it doesn't feel like that. And so we're going to learn how to plan for your future needs to be able to really reduce the stresses. But before I introduce you to our guest, I always like to give a couple of shout outs. So first of all, I want to just let people know, if you are local here in Minnesota, on October 10th, I'll be out at Woodbury Artist Senior Living from 4:30 till 6. I'm going to be doing a presentation on Betty the Bald Chicken, Lessons in How to Care. It is something free and sponsored by Artist Senior Living. You can call Jana at 651-493-2840 to register to that. We'd love to see you. I also want to remind people to go to alzheimerspeaks.com. There you can click on our free educational resources where you'll find tons of different things that you can tap into. So please don't hesitate to do that. We can also assist people with branding and marketing and keynotes and training, things of that nature as well. And then very last, I just want to mention Dementia Map, which is our global resource directory. Just go to dementiamap.com. You'll find scads of information there as well. So with no further ado, let's introduce you to our guest. So Jennifer, I am so excited to have you join us today. You have been one of the pioneers in the industry, and you have so much knowledge to be able to share with people. So I'm going to have you, if you don't mind, introduce yourself, and then we'll dive a little deeper.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you. My name is Jennifer Prell. I am the president and founder of Elderwerks Educational Services. We are a not-for-profit based in Illinois, helping any older adult, senior, or family caregiver who needs any type of senior living, care, support, benefits. We're like guidance counselors almost for seniors. We can help anyone, anywhere. We don't discriminate, and we don't say no. So we do get contacted by people all over the world, believe it or not, asking questions and needing help, and we will do our best to help. We're just experts in the Midwest. But what are you going to do?
Well, but I love how you phrase it, that you're kind of that guidance counselor, because that just has such a calming, supportive effect that we can all relate to. We've all been there and done that. And I can see where people would reach out to you because you're just such a comfortable, knowledgeable entity. And so I thank you for the work that you're doing. I always ask everybody, have they been personally touched by dementia in your own family and circle of friends?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, unfortunately, yes, circle of friends and family. My grandmother had dementia. My father has dementia. I am my father's daughter, so I'm looking forward to my memory loss when I'm older. Hopefully it'll skip me, but I'm prepared. I'm a planner, as I told you earlier, Lori. I have planned for most chaos that might happen as I age, and hopefully I can just avoid it. Like, you get the umbrella out just in case it's going to rain, and it won't rain because you have the umbrella. I'm hopeful.
Well, I love that you're walking your talk, though, that is something that could happen, because so many people avoid that and go, no, it's going to skip a generation or it's going to do whatever.
How do you know? How do you know? You don't know.
You don't know. None of us know. And with dementia, there are no boundaries. There are no rules. It hits whoever the heck it wants to. And we have to be prepared. So I think that is really wise. Why don't you tell us why Elderwerks is focusing on planning for seniors? Why did you create the company?
Well, I actually created Elderworks because I found a lot of people failing. They were failing at finding the services they really needed. They'd find services, but they weren't really appropriate. They weren't supportive. They didn't give them the emotional support and the structure they needed to move through their memory loss. And gosh, there's so many different types. Dementia and Alzheimer's, as you said, don't discriminate. And when I started Elderworks, I wanted to provide the dignity and respect they deserved. Just because they have memory loss does not mean they're not good people. Doesn't mean that they're not valued or valuable, right? And people get depressed and they get in this negative space because they don't think they have options, and they do. And so I created Elderworks so that people could find the right options for them. We're a free service. You want to listen to me? Great. You don't want to listen to me? That's fine too. But you need to hear, you need to listen, and you need to absorb the truth, because that's all we're going to give you. We're not going to fluff things. We're not going to avoid the truth like some family might, because they're afraid, right? They're afraid to give someone the truth, and they're afraid of the guilt that comes with it. We're a third party. We are a social service. We're here to support people, but give them the truth.
Well, I love that non-biased, position, because there are so many companies out there that are being paid to refer, and families don't really understand that they're not seeing the whole picture. I experienced that even in real estate when I was in that for 25 years, and I was shocked. I started at a small company, and I never considered how much money I was making on any house. And then I went to a big company, and I was shocked at how people would prioritize what homes they were going to show their clients based on what they were going to make.
Right.
And then, when I got into this space, I saw the same things happening, that it was really a limited view, and that it wasn't always disclosed that there was money exchanging hands for services.
Well, don't get me wrong, Lori. We do at Elderworks, we are funded sometimes by senior communities. When we refer a person into a senior community and they move in, they will fund us. They will provide a stipend. The difference between us and others is that we use the 15% of income we get from those referrals to help the 85% of the other people that we can't get funded on. And we don't discriminate. I don't care if we get paid or not. My team does not care if we get paid or not. The difference is we need to pay for the lights, and that helps pay for the lights. That helps pay for the employees. So the employees can be neutral parties. But yes, we do not only refer just because of income. We would never, ever do that.
Okay. Well, that's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
How do families figure out what kind of housing they need and what options are even available? Is that something that you really guide people through?
100%. Our team tours often, so we know every single senior community in like mid Illinois North, right? We know them all. We know who's good at what. We know who's really good at memory loss and supportive dementia and Alzheimer's. We know who's trying to be good at it and not really there yet. And then we have those who say they're good at it and they really aren't. And when you're looking at any type of community, doesn't matter if it's for memory loss or standard assisted living or independent living, you have to look at the whole picture for the person. So for instance, if I was looking housing for you, let's say, Lori, I would take you as a whole person, who you are now, who you used to be, and what your abilities currently are and what they can be. So how much support do you need? What kind of meals do you like? What kind of building would be best for you? What kind of location? Do you like urban setting? Do you like a suburban setting? Do you like flowers and trees and birds? Or do you prefer more of the loud, noisy trains in the background kind of setting? Because everybody's different, right? And then you take all the information, your personal needs, your budget, because honestly, everybody's budget's different, and we're going to accommodate you as best as we can. We're going to try to be nearest to the person who actually sees you the most. Which child sees you the most? Which child are we trying to avoid? Some people say they want to live by their doctors. I don't know. The doctor's not going to take you to the opera. The doctor's not going to visit you unless you're sick, right? You really need that loving support. So you really need to be by your loved one. So we take the whole person. It's not just, oh, here's a building. They help you with memory loss. Go there. It's not appropriate. So when you are touring, don't just look at the lights and the chandeliers and the pretty paintings and things like that. Look at the care. How long have the employees worked there? What kind of activities are scheduled throughout the day? Would your loved one like those activities? Do they add activities based on the people moving in? Which is huge, because if it's just bingo and it's just watching TV or the nature channel, that's not really stimulating. What kind of reminiscence are they providing? What kind of support of the person, right? So that's how I would suggest you tour. And then make notes, lots of notes, because when you tour, you're going to get crazy busy in your brain trying to remember it all. So write it down, make your notes.
I think that's great advice. When I sold real estate, I specialized in this. And so I would take people out and I do a lot of tours and things. And, you mentioned several different things. One was family dynamics of being closest to who actually sees you. And so often I would see people go, well, I'm going to move, the kids are telling me I need to move by so and so. And I almost never saw that really work, because the kids picked it, but the kids never adjusted their schedule to incorporate the parents.
Yep.
And so now the parents left their friends, their community, their doctors, everything. And they're sitting there going, where's my kids? And they're just feeling lost. And then they get depressed. And so really everyone has to be really honest at what is possible, because just because it sounds good, it's got to be doable too, on everyone's hand. And then when you had talked about being close to doctors, especially people with dementia, I know this with my own mom, where she moved to, pretty soon we transferred her seeing their doctor who was on site, because it was easier and less stressful.
Yep.
So, and I think that that's something that people don't always understand. That was a massive, massive help, because as she progressed, she would get so stressed and so wound up about going to the doctor and then getting the dates and times confused.
Yeah.
We had to tell her at the very end, where before we could tell her a couple weeks, early, and then it got down to 2 days. And then it's like, nope, she'll find out when we're there to pick her up and bring her in, because it was too stressful. And then it just, even that got too much. So I think that that's really important. And a lot of times people don't know that there's an in-house doctor that comes and visits, and they have such good rapport with who's caring for them too. There's more, I found it much more consistent, which was nice, as far as care. And then I loved when you said, and look at the activities and then go, is this appropriate for my person?
Exactly.
Because some of them just are not.
No.
And then you have to be honest with those. And say, what else is there, or how are they going to engage, or do they understand that your person has never been a social butterfly and has been more of an introvert, and will they let them be an introvert?
Exactly.
Instead of dragging them into situations where they've never felt comfortable.
No, and then they'll be more stressed, which is really not productive.
Yeah. And more stress creates more symptoms and more reactions that people then want to control. And I mean, it's into this whole spiral. So it really is about understanding that whole person. Do you, and again, I'm going back to my real estate days, but do you help people in terms of figuring out their assets? Because one of the things I found was a lot of times they're sitting on a house and they're not taking that asset into consideration in terms of playing it forward for payments and things like that. Yes. And they're like, well, we can't afford it. We can't afford it. And it's like, well, you have to look at this in a realistic way in terms of, and maybe a spouse is still going to live in the house and that's not going to be something that they can leverage at the time. But and then comparing apples to apples between communities, I think people have a really difficult time because they seem to be so often in a daze and they just listen to whatever they're told.
Right.
And then, like you said, they get really confused if they're not taking notes.
Well, the thing is with the money side, you have to look at the age they currently are at, like first early onset versus later stages, correct? So if they're 70 years old and they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's and they've just got it, they could live 15 years. So you have to plan for 15 years, right? If it's dementia, they could live a lot longer because dementia, there's hundreds of reasons you can get dementia, which is just memory loss of some kind, and it's just got to be diagnosed. But dementia just means memory loss. And does that mean you're going to die right away? No, you could live to 100. So you have to look at the person, how healthy they are physically, how healthy they are mentally, and then guesstimate how many years you think this person will live. It's kind of a morbid way to think, but you have to, because everyone lives and everyone dies, and you have to figure out something so that you can guide yourself. Yes, your house is typically your biggest asset. If you are moving by yourself or with your spouse to senior community, it's pretty easy to figure out your assets. Your house, your personal investments, your IRA, it's all of that, your veterans benefits. If you are married and one person's well and one's not, then it's a little more difficult. So you have to, the house, the car stay with the well spouse. And then the person that does need to move to a memory care community, they get to use the money in joint tenancy, right? So you have to figure out what that is. If they don't have any money, then you have to look at the Medicaid options. And it's very difficult to go straight into any facility with no income. So if you don't have any assets or income, you're going to be going into a skilled nursing facility, also known as a nursing home. And at that point, we're going to try to find you the best place in the worst case scenario. Okay. If you have funds, your world opens up. It's terrible, but it's true. The more money you have, the better care you get. It's just how life is. Memory loss is not cheap. It's about anywhere from $5,000 to $20,000 per month for your care. So we have to take all of that into account.
Yeah. And, a couple of things I just want to touch on. It was, you had said, the average lifespan is 15 years. And it used to be, people were told 5 to 7. My mom personally lived, 30 with
wow, that's amazing.
In her mid 50s till her mid 80s. Wow. And we are seeing more and more people living longer. Like I can name several people just off the top of my head who have lived 15 years already, and they're still able to Zoom and be part of groups and things. So I think we're going to see that lifespan longer, especially as people get diagnosed earlier. And then, as far as the difference between Alzheimer's and dementia, I would just say that, dementia is way more than just memory loss, because different types of dementia have different symptoms. So if someone's got like Parkinsonians, they may have real mobility issues and the shaking and things like that. That is going to be something that's going to have to be handled. You've got somebody with frontal temporal lobe who might have personality changes and behavioral outbursts. Somebody with Lewy body who's going to have possibly night terrors and hallucinations, swings in body temperature, swings in, hey, they like you and I, and then all of a sudden they're down for the count for 3 days and can't function. So there's lots of different things. And so trying to get a good diagnosis, I think, is really important. But I also want to let our audience know it's very difficult because it changes. And so a lot of people, when I got into this in 2009, were diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Then they were changed to, no, you just have mild cognitive impairment. And they'd go, there's nothing mild about this. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they had Lewy body, and some people have 2 or 3 different types of dementias. My mom, we were always told it was Alzheimer's, but we did have her brain autopsied. And at the end, the autopsy came back Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and Lewy body. And so,
that's a mess. That's very messy.
Yeah. And so I'm going to put a plug in that those autopsies are really helpful, for our researchers, but there's so many facets. And again, do you encourage them to ask what kind of training they have for their staff?
Oh, 100%. In Illinois, IDPH, the Illinois Department of Public Health, has required anyone who works with a person with dementia, they have to get dementia training. CNAs, nurses, doctors, pretty much anyone who interacts with a person with dementia. So that's fabulous. I don't know if it's in every state, but it is in Illinois. We're also working on getting the first responders some training, and that's we're going to be coming out with new training next year for our first responders in Illinois, so that they can understand how to interact with a person with dementia versus being fearful of them and maybe causing more harm. As you know, it's not easy sometimes working with people with dementia because you don't understand it and you just think they're on drugs or something's wrong, and then you're fearful and then something happens. And I don't want to get into that, but we want to make better outcomes. That's our goal, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and I think one of the good questions to ask, if you're asking about training too, as a family, is what type of training are they getting? Because there's a big difference between getting kind of book smart and statistics.
you mean in person versus book? Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I agree.
And actually knowing how to interact and stuff has a big impact. And like you said, checking on that staffing in terms of turnover and how long people have been there, and not just the direct care, but the nursing staff, the management, the sales reps, all of that stuff will give you a really good idea on stability, because without that, consistency of care is going to be much, much more difficult.
100%. Training is hugely important. Continuous training, not just train one and done. Continuous training on how to work with a person with dementia is important. There's also, when someone's living at home with a person with dementia, they might want to get some counseling and training on how to interact as well, because we don't want any type of abuse to happen because of lack of understanding. So that's important as well. And the home care providers we refer for someone with cognitive impairment or memory loss, they're also trained specifically for those types of interactions.
Wonderful. Well, if you just tuned in, we were talking with Jennifer Prell, who is the president and founder of Elderwerks Educational Services. And we've been discussing why aging doesn't have to be stressful and really giving you some tips on planning ahead. And you can always, rewind and make sure that you check out the beginning of this. But, go to her website, Elderwerks, and that's WERKS.org. You can always call them at 855-462-0100. They're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter as well. And, up next, we are going to be talking more of some of the challenges to tackle. And what do you do if you think your parents or relatives or friends aren't doing quite as well as they should? And again, why it's important not only to know their abilities, because it's really easy to focus on them, but also knowing about your own, capabilities. I think so often we overlook that, and it's always easier to point out somebody else's issues versus our own on that. So I would like to ask you next, Jennifer, what do you do? What do you recommend? Let's say, I'm dealing with my folks and maybe I'm coming home for the holidays, and I get there and go, oh boy, something's changed. The house isn't the way it is. Mom or dad's repeating themselves. The mail seems to be piled up on the table. I'm not sure if bills are being paid, but these little red flags are starting to appear.
Well, it's a huge, huge open-ended conversation here. So if you do go home and you find your mom and or dad has changed, not in a better way, okay, they're not eating right, their house is becoming a little bit more messy. It really depends on where you are with your loved ones. So for instance, if you have had open conversations with your parents, you planned well, and you prepared for changes like this, then you should already know what they want for their future. The problem is most people don't talk to their children. So if you go home and you've never had a conversation with your parents about what their wants and needs are as they age, it's probably better to do it then, right then. And if they can't have an honest and open conversation, maybe bring in the clergy Maybe bring in someone who they trust, their doctor, and say, look, there are some changes. We really need to have you go see this person and have a conversation. And if they're really not open to it, then do it for, white lies are okay. We're going to go to church Sunday. We're going to see the pastor. We're going to see the priest. I haven't seen him in a while. I just want to go see him, and I know you see him all the time. So let's go sit down, have coffee. Make a reason to go see someone they respect, so you can have a candid conversation, or they can have a candid conversation, and make sure that that person that you're meeting with understands why you're going, so they can support the conversation the correct way. The worst thing you can do is go in unplanned and then figure out that the person you're going to bring in, the priest or whomever, is on your side. They may not be. They may not see what you see. So you need to give them the reasons why, so that they can assess. Now, if you go in and your parent is really not cognitively with it, the first thing you do is go see your general practitioner, your geriatrician, or your doctor, whomever that doctor is, your mom's doctor. You go make an appointment and you get tested for a UTI, urinary tract infection, because those can skew your brain and make it seem like you have Alzheimer's. And it's just an infection that can get cleaned up. When it's cleaned up, it's fine. If it's not a UTI and the doctor thinks there's more to it, they will probably schedule some sort of doctor, a psychologist or a neuropsychologist, or someone to evaluate the brain, so that your mom and or dad can know what's going on with them and then plan for their future, or if they're further along, so that you can now take over as power of attorney and get them the help they need. Hopefully you have power of attorney in place. If you do not have power of attorney in place, you are now going to have to go through emergency guardianship with an elder law attorney or your preferred attorney, so that you can make sure that your mom or dad can get the care they need. If you don't have a power of attorney for healthcare and property in place, you're going to be swimming upstream. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be stressful, and you have to prepare for that. And if you're not the person to do it, and you have siblings who are more prepared to do it, ask them for help. Asking for help is the hardest thing that we found anybody can do. People don't ask for help. They just flail. They think. They don't understand why they're not going, oh my God, help me. Everybody should ask for help.
Yeah, it's there's such a stigma in society of asking for help. And there's also a stigma in terms of family dynamics of who should be in charge. And I'll use my own family as an example. I was very, very close to my folks. My brothers weren't near as close as I was. So they picked me to be power of attorney and the whole, 9 yards. My older brother was very upset. He was the oldest. He was the eldest. That was his role. And yet he didn't really know my parents. I mean, not on the level that you need to know them to help them through those decisions of what quality of life is. And you have to be emotionally open to have those conversations too, which a lot of people struggle with so often. I also loved when you talked about, what do I have here? The need to know and say what is understood when you're bringing them to meet with maybe the clergy or a friend, because, they can sabotage you in 2 seconds.
We've had it happen so many times. We're like, oh my gosh, why did they say this?
Yeah. And so that you need to really kind of have your list of, gosh, I just came home. We weren't seeing this before, but it's pretty evident now. Have you seen this? And I think sometimes when we have those discussions with our folks or our friends or our relatives, a lot of times people go, oh, I heard her say we have to have this discussion, and they take it on as I have to control everything, and they don't have any options. And think about how you would feel if somebody came into your life like that. I mean, we have to be conscious of, in my opinion anyways, of including them. And that can be really difficult and scary and slow things down when you're like, I'm on limited time. But then again, that gets into your abilities and stuff. And then you had mentioned the UTIs, which I know for myself, I knew nothing about. My mom was she actually ended up living in a nursing home. And I remember going to visit her one day, and she's in her wheelchair and her eyes are like rolling back in her head. And I thought they had just over medicated her. And I go stomping up to the nurse's station, and they're like, oh, she's probably got a UTI. And I'm like, no way, is that a UTI? I know what a UTI is like, and I'm because it's different in them than it is for what we have,
Yeah.
very different. And sure enough, it was a UTI. She got on medication. Boom, she was back to normal. Everything was okay. But you don't know what that is going to look like on so many different levels. I've seen so many different symptoms over the years with that. And like you said, sometimes it can just be brain fog and being tired. Sometimes it can be behavioral. Sometimes it can just be totally like almost unconscious, depending on where that infection is at. And so to me, that is like a number one thing. And I'm going to throw in another thing that I have learned over the years is don't just tell the doctor, okay, she's done taking her medications and let it go. I always recommend people, and again, I'm not a nurse, but I've heard so many people say this, and nurses recommend this, ask the doctor to take another test.
Absolutely.
Because if the infection's not gone, it's going to come back with a vengeance. And then, you risk that.
Septic. They can go septic.
Yeah.
Sepsis is terrible.
Yeah. Not only septic, but also they start getting antibiotic resistant when we let it go too far, which can be really dangerous.
I do have a tip. There's a tip for everybody who's listening. If your loved one does get assistance with cleanup after going to the restroom, install a bidet. If you can install a bidet at home or in the nursing home, or the assisted living, wherever they're living, bidets will save you so much drama. It cleans you up, and it also helps with UTIs because sometimes we don't wipe well. And if we're doing it ourselves or we get help, sometimes it's just remnants going up into your stream. If you have a bidet, you are clean and your CNAs will love you.
Yep. Yeah, I'll throw in another tip too, a product, and I don't know if you've heard of this, but Seni for incontinence. If people, their product, I've interviewed so many people who use this, from home health care to individuals themselves and communities. And they say it's like a night and day because it wicks away, and it's got leak guards. It reduces the stress of so many levels and those skin breakdowns and things like that. So making sure that you have good product and understand how to use it as well. Otherwise, you're causing more problems.
Exactly. Exactly. I did not even know about that one. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, absolutely fabulous. And you can get free, they'll usually send you out free samples too, to make sure that you're getting the correct sizes. And yeah, they're absolutely wonderful. Another question I wanted to ask you was, and I mentioned this in the beginning before we kind of came into the second section, about analyzing your own capabilities. People don't even know what to analyze, because they're in crisis mode.
Yeah, they're just trying to find a solution, right?
Yeah. So what should they be looking at?
Well, it depends what we're looking at in general. So, for instance, I'm not a caregiver. I know I'm not a caregiver. I have the patience of a gnat. Do you think I could take care of my parents, especially when they're not listening to me because they can't listen to 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 10 directions at once? No, I would be crazy. They would be upset. It would be a nightmare. So when you're trying to figure things out, what are your abilities? And never take things personally. So for instance, you were talking about power of attorney and power struggles in families. Oh yeah. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 children, you're going to get dynamics. You have to make sure your parents set everything up for success. The person they want to be the power of attorney, or persons, they have to tell the children why. We have chosen Bobby to be the power of attorney for property because he's very good at putting down the numbers and being fiscally responsible. And we know he won't get stressed trying to track every single dollar spent because he has to make sure it's documented. And I don't think anyone else here would enjoy it. So that's why we chose Bobby. And we chose Lisa for healthcare because we know Lisa will not have a problem doing what she needs to do on our behalf. So our living will has been handed to her. She knows what we want. she's able to do that. She won't become too emotional to not be able to fulfill our needs. These are the reasons why. The parents have to communicate. It's got nothing to do with age. It has nothing to do with the birth order. It has everything to do with your abilities. And don't take it personally. It is not personal. This is a huge decision by the person's appointing them. And it's a huge decision to accept the appointment. It is stressful. No one wants to be an executor. No one wants to be a power of attorney. It is not fun. These are not fun jobs, guys. Would prefer not to do it. But guess what? I am the most structured person in my family. I will not make an emotional decision. All decisions will be based on fact in my world. And that is why I was appointed by my parents as power of attorney and the executor, because I will always do what's right. And they get that. And my sister and brother get that. And they're okay with it because why? They had the conversation with them. My parents talked to them and told them the why. If you tell the people the why, maybe they'll understand more and be less combative when the need arises.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I would also add to have an elder attorney that really knows all the little things that can creep up and pop in and need to be dealt with. I remember going with my folks to bring them to the attorney. And the attorney was actually a very good friend of mine. She's like the top attorney in Minnesota. And she said, Lori, you need to leave the room now. I need to talk to your folks. And my folks' eyeballs just got huge. Like, no, she has to stay. And she's like, no, she needs to leave the room. We have to talk turkey about each one of your kids and their spouses or potentials. Spouses, are they addicts? Are they gamblers? Are they, all kinds of different things? What kind of person are they? What kind of person is their spouse? What are the odds of them getting divorced? Because that could affect some of this stuff too. And I ended up staying because they said Lori knows everything, and they just weren't going to do it without me being in the room. So it was really interesting for me to be able to be in on that conversation. And I was so thankful that Chris was so direct about all these potential things that people overlook. Because a lot of times people will say, well, I'm going to have them do it because I don't want to get in an argument with them because I know they're not going to like this. So I'm just going to let them do that. But if they're not a good match, so like with Chris, the attorney, she was so funny. She said, I'm just going to give you a little example. She's like, I was kind of a wild child. My parents always still see me as the wild child. I'm an attorney. I'm one of the best elder attorneys in Minnesota. And yet my dad did not trust me because he still saw me
as a child,
as the wild child.
Yeah.
And she said, we laugh about that now, but that was really a struggle in their family. And there's those family dynamics and roles that people play. And I remember as she was talking with my folks through all this, and who's the most stable, who's the most compassionate, who knows you the best, blah, 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 blah. And so they picked me for power of attorney and said, well, Lori just knows us. We've stayed with her. She's always the one checking on us. We know that she'll care for us well. And then I know it came to the time of, well, who would you like to pull the plug? And they said, Mark won't have a problem with that. Scott and Lori will have a problem with that. But Mark can be the one if that decision needs to be made. And so it was really interesting how everything unfolded and, how they made their decisions and stuff. And yet it was still a struggle. They talked about it, but I don't think as directly as what you're recommending, which I think would have been helpful. Though I think there still would have been hurt feelings over that, because again, their personal beliefs, like for my older brother, was this is my role. This is what people expect me to do because I'm the oldest. And yet that isn't going to be the best match for them. And so, but I think we get into those judgment roles a lot, and we take on roles even if we don't feel comfortable with them because it's the right thing to do,
or you're the only person for that position.
Exactly. And then there are families that don't get along at all.
Yeah.
And then that's a whole nother dynamic.
Oh gosh, yeah, I can't even talk about. I got a few cases I'm working on now. They're nasty, nasty. They're not so fun.
Well, and sometimes you have to hire an outside person to do some things because it's just so dysfunctional.
Well, you mentioned it. The elder law attorney that's your right pocket. Put them in your right pocket. They're there for you. Elder law attorneys are wonderful. They're supposed to make sure that you're not being manipulated by your adult children, that there's not undue influence by your adult children in your decision making, because this is a financial transaction. A lot of it's financial, and they want to make sure that everything is done for the right reasons. That is their job, and that is why your attorney was so valuable to you, Lori, because your attorney did her job perfectly.
Yeah. Well, there are times when families try to undo what the attorneys have done. And I'll give an example. And this was actually in my own family. So my older brother was not happy that I had power of attorney, and his girlfriend was a paralegal, and they had my folks sign a new power of attorney. And I was supposed to be taking my parents over to the attorney to sign the final paperwork. And we ended up bringing my dad to the hospital, and he was in the emergency room. They thought his cancer was back and yada, yada, yada. Well, as my dad's laying there, I'm calling the attorney, and she is saying, well, I'll be right down, and we've got to get these papers signed. And then I told her what happened. And she said, you tell your dad to hang on. I am coming right down. I know what his wishes were. I was in that room. Your brother had no right to do that. And she got down there, and she almost jumped over the gurney when my dad was laying on in the emergency room with my brother, and just scolded him and said, that is not cool at all. But it was like kind of a sneak around thing. And my dad just felt really pressured. I mean, he said that in front of all of us.
Which is elder abuse, honestly.
Yeah. And I don't think my brother was looking at it necessarily in that light.
Right.
But those things happen, guys. Right now I've got several people who are in court with family, feuding over things, and things that they never in a million years thought would occur because everybody got along, and all of a sudden there's money and people get goofy.
Oh, they get greedy. People get greedy. You don't have to be malicious to be abusive. You don't have to understand that that's what you're doing, but you are. We do try to educate people in what you can and cannot do. And when you're influencing an older adult, especially one with cognition issues, in your way, let's say your way, that can be considered elder abuse. That can be considered financial exploitation. That can be considered a nice little jail cell for you. So think hard. Is this really worth it? Are you really willing to give up all your family so you get what you want? I don't think so, unless you are greedy. Now, I have met greedy people. I have wanted to jump over the gurney and strangle people. Okay. We're working with quite a few people that just don't even see their parents as real humans. They see them as dollar signs. That makes me sick. And there are all kinds of people, right? And I know 99% of people are good, especially when it comes to your parents. No one doesn't like their mama. Mama's like mama, right? It's by mama. Now there are parents who weren't so nice to their children. So, you can understand some of the dynamic, but it always has to be on the right side of the law. It always has to be on what's right ethically and emotionally. If you can't sleep at night, there's a reason.
Yeah. I'm going to throw in one other story because I think this is important too for families to understand. And again, this goes back to my real estate days. I was called to go out and sell a house. A mom had died. The son had been living with the mom for, I don't know, several years, taking care of her. Couple other sons. One was an attorney. Both were out of state. And this one son, 24/7, he was taking care of his mom.
Right.
He was not allowed to sign at closing because he wasn't power of attorney. The other two boys were. He was at closing. he was so hurt and so distraught. And, as a real estate agent, I got blamed for that. And I said, and the one brother was an attorney, and I'm like, can we just all explain legally he can't sign off on these documents, because he's not a party to them.
Right.
And I ended up removing myself from the room because he was so stressed out. And I thought, okay, I'm going to let the closer kind of handle this. And the brothers really weren't compassionate to this other brother at all. They were just there to kind of get their checks. And he knew that, and he really wanted closure for his mom, which he didn't get. I mean, he did the whole transaction really of getting the house prepared to close, the whole, all of that, and taking care of her for all these years. And he was devastated. He loved his mom. After the closing was done, I went back in the room to talk with the closer, and I was sitting in the chair this gentleman was sitting in, and I look on the ground, and there's a bullet. And he kept reaching kind of for his boot. Had no idea what was going on. But, these times can really be emotionally stressful.
Yes.
And people need to understand this. Things can, can
escalate
sideways, or can even become deadly. I had one friend where it actually was very deadly in their family because, things weren't communicated and understood. And sometimes you don't know that until it's too late. But I think if we can be compassionate of each other's roles and appreciate what people are doing,
right,
and matching those skill sets, when we were talking about abilities too, a lot of times there'll be things like, well, I'll do the finances and you can do the showers, or you can do the laundry or whatever. And you might give somebody, doing the showers that's just not comfortable with that. And if they're not comfortable, your person you're caring for is not comfortable.
Right.
So having those things match, or you give somebody cooking and cleaning and that's not their thing.
You have to assign tasks by people's abilities. Willingness does not mean it's their ability. Like, you can make me do the accounting, but do you really want me to? Come on now.
Good point. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. The time's just flown by.
Absolutely.
I'm sure people will find this conversation really helpful, Jennifer. So I appreciate, all the work that you do with Elderwerks Educational Services. And I also want to ask our listeners to like, click, and share this show. And it's not because I'm a numbers chaser. That's just not me at all. But I want you to join forces with us and be a giver of hope. Pass this information along. It takes no time and it costs you nothing to just share this information with your sphere of influence, because you have no idea who needs this information or when they're going to need this information. But people need to know it exists. And so often we don't know what we don't know until we're in the middle of a crisis. And yet it's so much better to get educated before things hit the fan. We all know that. So again, you can go to Jennifer's website, elderwerks.org, and that is WERKS. They are on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, or you can call the office at 855-462-0100. Again, thank you so much, everyone. And thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was fun.
It's time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Hey everybody, Jared Sebesta here, host of Retire Repurposed. Now, this podcast is about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. We believe retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful, purposeful, and fulfilling season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. To listen now, search Retire Repurposed on your favorite podcast platform, Senior Resource, or Life Audio.